Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Curtis Nash. I am the chair of the research committee, and I'll be moderating today's panel on leveraging the Campus Housing Index, turning data into action. I want to thank you all for coming today. The purpose of the panel will explore how the Campus Housing Index, or the CHI, can be leveraged to inform research, guide institutional decision-making, and enhance student housing practice. Panelists will share insights on accessing and interpreting CHI data, demonstrate real-world applications, and discuss future directions for the tool, helping attendees turn data into actionable strategies for their campuses. As we begin, I'd first like our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into a series of questions where our panelists can answer and share their insights. So we'll start with Steve.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for being here. My name is Steve Kleuver. I'm the Director of Operations for Florida State University Housing. I've had the pleasure of serving at FSU for 17 years, and I've been working with CHI since its inception.
And move on to TJ.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is TJ Logan. I am the Executive Director of our higher ed practice at Brailsford and Dunlavey. We are a higher ed advisory firm who's been doing this work for about 30 years with hundreds and hundreds of institutions around the country. Before joining the firm a few years ago, I worked on your side of the table. I was a higher ed practitioner. I oversaw auxiliaries at Ohio State University, at Temple University, University of Florida, and Kent State University. I served 5 terms on the ACUHO-I Executive Board, and I've been working with the CHI since its inception as well. And so super excited to talk to you about it today.
Thanks, TJ. And David.
Hello, my name is Dave Craig. I'm at Oregon State University. I am both an associate director and our director of business development and assessment for University Housing and Dining Services. I've been in that role for about 10 years. I also have just stepped off of 2 terms as the chair of the Campus Housing Index Engagement Committee.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. And we also have Tori here, who will be serving as kind of tech support, but she's also going to help get us lit off on the first prompt, Tori, if you could talk to us about the Campus Housing Index and how it's structured.
Sure. And I'll introduce myself first, just so everyone knows. My name is Tori Negash, and I'm the Research Initiatives Manager at ACUHO-I. Starting my 5th year with ACUHO-I, and the Campus Housing Index is one of the areas that I manage. And so I've been working with that now for about 5 years, and I'm happy to have you all here today so you can learn more about it and to share a little bit. So at a very basic level, the Campus Housing Index is a data benchmarking platform. We have data organized into 3 areas: profile, which is essentially an institution's demographics or characteristics; operations, which is the bulk of the data that we collect, and that really is where probably what you're looking for is going to live. And then the last section is compensation, and so that's where we ask about the different positions you have on your campus, organized into occupations, and then some information about the pay, professional development, educational requirements for those positions. For some of them, we ask about functional areas, and so that's where we gather that specific information. And so at a very high level overview, but that's essentially what you're going to find.
Thanks, Tori. And I also want to note, as we get started, if you have questions, please put them into the chat, and we'll be sure to integrate those questions as the webinar unfolds. So gentlemen, if you could, what types of data or insights can professionals gain from CHI from your experience?
Well, I think for most things housing, it's really just about anything you would want to benchmark, whether that's like student to resident to professional staff ratio, resident to student parapro, like RA type positions ratios, budgets, capital investment, custodial staff to square footage, custodial staff to residents. I mean, it's all there. So for me, it's a great place to start. Part of what I oversee for our department is our cyclical review process for our business units. And so that's like the first place I start when I'm talking to one of my other unit leaders about what we need to be looking at for their review is a rough cut set of benchmarks that's relevant to that unit out of the CHI, with the exception of campus dining and catering, where I use the NACUS tool, which is done by the same company. So if you have a dining operation, there's a companion to this. I'm just going to kind of plug that right now, but that'll be the end of that because this is an ACUHO-I webinar.
One thing I like that Dave said is that it's an excellent starting place. I like to use it as my assumption tester. I think it's easy for folks to get tunnel vision. And well, my three friends at different institutions all do this, so we're the only institution that doesn't do this. And then when you can actually benchmark and pull these data and maybe either confirm or refute that. But one theme that I'm going to hit on as we go through this session is it's an excellent starting place. But it really spawns further research. Like all research should spawn further research. You absolutely need to do that because that's going to start getting you to some of your context. The filters are very helpful when you're looking at regionally, type of institution. Just make sure that when you're using those data, you are considering those filters to get you as close to, I don't know if it'll ever be fully apples to apples because there's context to every institution, but it's going to be a lot closer than if you're comparing to an institution very much not like your own.
I'm going to piggyback on what you said, Steve, because you're making a lot of what I think are the most important points about the CHI, and that's one. It is definitely a conversation starter. It should not be the solution in search of a problem, right? If you are there trying to defend a thing or prove a thing, you're probably in the wrong place. But if you're there asking a genuine and authentic question about sort of what is happening in the industry, I think it's a really, really good place to start that investigation. I think the other thing that you said that is really, really important, and I use this word a lot, is that context is king. And the CHI I have found to be one of the most powerful tools for truly understanding who our peers are, right? We've all worked at different institutions who have said, show me my athletic conference, show me my my regional conference for ACUHO-I, show me my just private institutions, just public. And at the end of the day, what the CHI helps you to do is understand where you sit in the context of the industry relative to other types of institutions. And I think that's a really great place to start with asking questions. As an example, recently we were working with a client who said, we want to have a second year live on requirement. We're a large public institution. But then as we look at their inventory in the CHI of their actual room types, they profile like a small private institution. And so there's this disjointedness in terms of what they physically are and what they say they want to profile like. And so it's a great conversation starter on, well, what has allowed your inventory to turn into this thing? And what does it mean for how you're going to deliver a residential experience? So Steve, I'll double down on all the things you said because I think they are the most critical places to start with this data is just understanding context.
Great insights there. So to evolve that, so how has the CHI evolved in recent years? So what trends and some of the data changes have you noticed over the past few years that the group might find helpful to understand?
Yeah, one thing that I like with, and I do this with our homegrown assessments, is I say it's great insight on what was on my mind that year. So you can almost in years forward go back and look at assessment instruments you've done and what was the critical components. They're almost artifacts through time. And in the CHI, you have certainly, it is not a static instrument. Think about where we were as a field 5 years ago, 8 years ago, all the changes that we have seen what before COVID and several different political cycles. It's interesting to see how that has changed over time. It's interesting when you see those those questions that were clearly in response to what was going on at that time. I always like seeing those little artifacts and just remembering back to that. So it certainly is not static. I think of all survey instruments, it does a really good job of trying to keep up with contemporary events and what we are facing as a field.
I'll take the other side of the coin, and that is it sometimes is a bit surprising what has not changed in the CHI in terms of data trends. And one of the things I look at CHI as a lag indicator, right? It tells us what people are reporting from the last year and where the industry is as of this moment. It doesn't necessarily tell us where it's going to go. We have to really apply some professional judgment there. But I find it really, really interesting. As an example, Tori, you might remember a few weeks back, one of the questions we were exploring is the number of staff members who were graduate students versus full-time professional students and what type of degree certification. And a hypothesis might have been that as things have changed over the last several years and we see less institutions offering student affairs graduate programs, that we would actually see a decline in the percentage of graduate staff of the entirety of your residence life staff. And actually, that's not true. It's actually been stable year to year to year to year to year. And one of my takeaways from looking at that is, boy, we talk an awful lot about changing the RA position and retooling it. We talk an awful lot about how we need to restructure this for this century and what's going on in a post-COVID world. But there's not a lot of evidence that there's been action taken there. And so I look at some of these things and the things that have not changed, and I see them as a call to action more so than I see them as a trend that's going to tell us what the future is going to bring. I think it tells us that the future is ours to figure out. We've got to start to implement those changes, and then we're going to look back at that indicator in a year and say, did it actually happen? So I actually find it more interesting to look at the things that haven't changed as a motivation for what we need to get to work on as an industry.
Perfect. So I'm going to move on to our next set of questions. So it's going to be about practical steps for obtaining and interpreting CHI data. So the first question is, how can institutions access CHI data? Just kind of a basic how-to, where can you go to actually find this data and start to use it on your campus?
I'm going to pipe up first because there's a question in the Q&A from Paul. May an institution who is not a member of ACUHO-I participate in the CHI through the sharing of their information? And so I'm going to mark that as answered live. Yes, we welcome participation from any and all institutions. Membership with ACUHO-I is not a requirement. And so when data collection opens each year, any institution that is interested in participating is welcome to participate. So that sort of fits in this section, but hopefully that answers the question, and let me know if you have more questions about that and I can answer those offline too.
So go ahead, TJ.
Well, I was actually going to defer to these two guys on how to access the data, or even Tori, because I think my perspective is probably a little bit different than theirs as campus-based practitioners. So I want to make sure folks get the best information for accessing.
Yeah, I can answer if that would be helpful. So any institution that participates and completes at least 50% of the instrument receives free basic access to the results. As a little prompt, those will be released next week publicly, so they're coming soon, the most recent results. And to log in and to view those, you would visit the ACUHO-I website. There is a CHI page where there's a login button, and you would log in using your same ACUHO-I credentials that you use to access the portal, the online community, and all the other areas of the ACUHO-I website. If you did not participate and are interested in seeing the results, or you didn't reach that 50% and you want to see the results, or you just want more access to data filters, we do also have premium subscriptions available that you can purchase access to. And there is also information about that on the ACUHO-I website too. And so that's sort of an overview. And then anyone on your staff would have access to the results. So anyone on the institutional roster with ACUHO-I, they would be limited just to profile and operations results. And only those staff you designate would have access to view the compensation information. So by default, that is limited just to those that are listed as senior housing officers.
And I would love to jump in for a moment and just say, the 50% threshold to gain access to the data is very generous. When you actually start sitting, I know there seems like there's a pretty good broad amount of questions, and it is a lot of questions, but as you really start digging into it, you'll find that most members of your department who have their finger on the pulse could easily answer many of these questions. And even if you were to just pull an hour of a staff meeting with some of your mid to mid upper leadership and say, hey, let's just kind of sit down and bang these questions out, I think you will find it is not a substantial burden. So if there's anyone who's looking at this and saying this is daunting, this is a lot, it is something that's actually a pretty fun exercise to do, particularly with the team. And once you've done it the first time, it's really been structured and set up in a way where you can copy last year's answers. Now, you'll obviously need to review last year's answers, but you can start that as a base. So if anyone's kind of sitting on the timelines, yeah, I don't know if we really want to commit to it. You are really helping your entire field in the body of research just by taking an hour with a few of your mid to upper leadership and just knocking it out.
And the other thing I'd add to that is that, I mean, Tori the system does some error checking on the back end, and Tori will reach out if something looks really screwy. But, the only person that is accountable is around the 100% accuracy is you. And so, if that means that it's easier for you to do your budget rounded it to the tens of thousands of dollars rather than right out to the penny, or whatever that means for you, having some information in there is better than not having any information at all. Definitely want it to be as accurate as you can make it. But for me, one of the goals of our committee is to get more and more people to provide input in. I don't want the accuracy of the data that you feel like it needs to be out to the penny or to the point of an FTE or whatever the case may be, to be a barrier to you completing at least half of that data input.
Thanks, guys. Now to take it a step further, what kinds of questions or problems have you used CHI to help explore answer for your department or your work?
I think definitely at the senior housing officer level, we've looked at typical compensation across different types of positions, and we're able to cut that by region and by institution type, public or private. And that's helpful as we're looking at salaries as kind of a counterpoint to the salary benchmarking that our human resources office does as we post positions and recruit. And then it's a lot of it for me. What most often comes up is staffing ratios are helpful as well. And staffing is something that's unique to every institution and that institution's context and location and whatnot. But it's helpful to know, like, am I in the ballpark around whichever staffing position or group of positions that we're looking at as maybe part of an internal or an external review process, just as an example. Because it sets how deep of a dive do we need to go into this, right? Are we way off and we need to figure out why and why that makes sense for here, or are we in the ballpark already and we can do maybe a higher level analysis that isn't as deep of a dive?
Yeah, I would say a lot of what I've seen used is, and I think this would make it very accessible to a lot of folks, is the residence life-based policies. And a lot of the reasons why I think that there's probably a little more usage of that is as housing, a lot of folks have come up through residence life. So this is what I mean when I say hope it's relatable. A lot of those policies you really have a lot of control on. The bulk of my job is my area is operations, which includes facilities, IT, as well as data analytics and assessment. And there are a lot of campus partners and external partners that really impact the way that our work is done, like the maintenance that we're done, the facilities based work, the IT based work. It's neat to see what other institutions are doing, but there's a lot of institutional controls that say that our process, say for instance at FSU, we're a bifurcated model and we're going to remain that way. So it is interesting to see what other institutions are doing, but the day to day, nothing in my seat am I going to really make a monumental change on that. I can bring these data to decision makers. I think that's useful. But when it comes down to some of those residence life-based policies or this housing-based policies, there's a lot more control, and a lot more ability for us to make a determination for our own department. So I would say those have been useful. It does give us data that we can take to our HR, particularly in the compensation, as has already been mentioned. But again, even that is constrained by institutional forces as well. So I would say those, and fortunately, I think it's a good orientation for a lot of folks because, like I said, a lot of folks have come up through residence life, so it's very relatable, and is a nice way to get your feet wet.
So just as a level setting in terms of how we use the data. So Brailsford and Dunlavey is in a partnership with ACUHO-I to have access to CHI data, but it is anonymized access. So we actually can't see individual institutions or know what individual institutions have submitted. We have no access to salary data, so we don't know any of that information. And the purpose of the partnership is to really help analyze the data and to provide back some more strategic insights on what the data tells us about the industry, to the association, to individual institutions, et cetera, et cetera. And so through that lens, some of the questions that we have dove deeply into are really along the operational lines and understanding the CHI is a really, really powerful database. I have thought that since its inception that it is one of the most important things that ACUHO-I has ever done because of the strategic importance that it holds for advancing the field. And so as an example, in the context of the CHI, when you look at aggregate data, you can understand what is the OpEx per bed on a campus that has a comprehensive housing system? What is the margin per bed? What is the revenue per bed? And how does that compare to institutions that are bifurcated? How does that compare to across public and private institutions? Those are really, really important things to understand to create those true benchmarks so that institutions can sit and say, oh, where do I sit relative to the type of institution I aspire to profile like? And what does it mean for my overall operations? I agree with and would piggyback on the staffing ratios piece. I think there's a lot of really valuable operational data in there. But I think oftentimes people take too narrow of a view of the data and of the information. And I think the key to success in terms of research questions we can answer is broadening out a little bit and looking at what it tells us about who our peers actually are and what the trends are related to our peers, particularly along those operational pieces. As an example, I can tell you what percentage of total revenue conference revenue is at large public institutions. You know who's interested in those kinds of questions? CFOs and COOs and presidents. And so now we have empowered the senior housing officers and the housing professionals in our field to have some of the most important information about auxiliaries that our institutional executive leadership cares about. And that's the piece that we'd like to move the needle on is not just empowering you to have the information, but empowering you to leverage it to make meaningful change at your institution and be a leader at that table.
Terrific insights. And I think that transitions well into the next question. If you could, what insights have emerged from using CHI that impacted decision making? And if you have examples that you can share publicly, that would be terrific for the attendees to hear.
I have a few of them, but I didn't want to talk back to back. So, and the question was, how has the data been used to influence decision making? Is that the?
Yes, if you
Yeah,
had a specific example or two that
absolutely.
you could give. Perfect.
Absolutely. So the one that I presented to you earlier about sort of the inventory of the institution, and they were seeking to make a decision about their live-on policy. They said, we have a 1-year live-on requirement. We'd like to have a 2-year live-on requirement. Should we do that or should we not do that? And what the CHI data helped to frame up was an ability to say, you're asking the wrong question. The question you ought to be asking is, why is your inventory what it is? And how should you structure your housing organization and reinvest in your facilities responsibly to be the kind of residential experience you want to be? And the kind of decision making that's informed for that institution is they have actually committed to completely restructuring their housing operation, moving from a bifurcated system to a comprehensive system, which is much more aligned with large land grant institutions nationally, if you look at the data across the CHI. And so that's a huge wholesale change that was influenced by a conversation that started with, here's who you say you are, and here's how you look in the data. So that's one big one. Another one was we did some work with another large public institution to understand their OpEx and margin per bed, and it led them to think about. They actually had a part of their campus that was generating as much revenue per bed as the average, but they were spending far less per bed than the average, meaning that their operating expense was really, really low. And they said, that's good. And we said, well, maybe it's good, but when we combine it with IPEDS data and see that your retention rates are down, maybe it's bad, because where they were seeing the cost savings was actually in the residence life staffing. And what they decided from a decision-making perspective was, we need to invest more in our residence life staff, which was seen as an expense unit up to that point, because the value proposition of having RAs and having hall directors and things like that actually leads to higher retention of our students. And we as an institution need to make a bigger investment. So there's lots of examples of where this data can carry really powerful, organizational structure changing type of decisions. And those are just two. This happens every single day if we leverage the data the right way.
I would say staffing ratios is where the rubber kind of most often meets the road for us, whether that's RAs or RDs or pro staff in a particular functional area. That's been really helpful. We've done that across our custodial unit with our residential education unit when we're talking about RAs and resident directors and area directors. Kind of across the entire department.
Each part of a housing program has a section. In CHI, the conference services one is always a very interesting one because a lot of times we have factors that either constrict or promote the expansion of that program. At the state of Florida, particularly Florida State University, we have a very robust summer school program, which that will detract from available bed space used for those summer conference buildings. Being able to track our revenue over time allows us to make decisions related to rental rate to ensure that we are still meeting our institutional goals, earning that revenue that then gets reinvested into our residential communities during those 9 months. So those are, again, a good way for us to check and make sure that we are on par. It helps us set rental rates. It certainly provides insight on compensation. There's a lot of, I like what TJ said about CFOs and COOs. Those are the ones that are very interested in some of these nuts and bolts and the bottom line. And I think CHI gives you a good ability to look at that.
How might CHI complement other data sources that your institutions might use?
I really like that example. I learned something. I really like that example TJ brought up about the comparison with the IPEDS data and your retention data and looking at how you can make investments that could potentially impact those really core key performance metrics. But again, I'm gonna harp back to something I said at the beginning. There's always going to be context. So just because you increase your resources in an area and then the next year you saw your retention either go up or down, you need to do more. You need to really get boots on the grounds, and a lot, and folks that have seen me at conference know I talk a lot about focus groups and continual surveying and how you get out to really kind of draw that connection between your actions and the tangible impact. So it's again, it's a starting place. Um, it's a starting place for more research.
I'll double down on iPads as a public data source. I think one of the things I said at the top was I believe the CHI is one of the most powerful and strategic tools that we have at our disposal. And one of the reasons for that is because it takes what is proprietary, only known to ACUHO-I and its members' data, and combines it with public, known to the world data in a very, very powerful way. There's really only one organization, and you're looking at it right now, that has access in one database to the comprehensive list of who has a first-year live-on requirement and what somebody's first to second year retention is. Boy, that's a powerful combination to understand if live-on requirements and retention rates have any correlation, or live-on requirements and graduation rates have any correlation. The relationships between the variables in those two data sets is really, really special. And I suspect that, ACUHO-I is very strategic, that will only continue to grow beyond iPads into other types of data sources and leveraging of technology to make the association more strategic on behalf of its members. I think it's a great thing.
I want to move on to talking about the future directions and enhancements. So how can users contribute to improving CHI's relevance and usability?
Contribute data. That's the big one. Is the bigger the data set is, the more comprehensive it'll be. Right now, sometimes I have to look pretty wide to get enough of a response that the system will spit something out, because it needs to be a broad enough data set that it's truly anonymous. So that's the big one, is contribute data, and go for that 50% so that you can get access, but maybe the next year, fill out another new area. Don't just copy and edit your information over, and work your way up to sharing as much as you're comfortable. People are really apprehensive, I think, around sharing their compensation data. But that's, nobody can see that, but well, I would imagine the people on the back end that run the database, but on the viewer side, it's all aggregated. So you don't, your peers are not going to know what a hall director is making wherever at your institution. But that's the toughest one, where you have to usually have a pretty broad group that you're looking across in order to get thorough results.
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience where we're diving in and we're really on a roll, and then you get to that threshold that there's not enough peer institutions based on your filters, and it kind of stops it. So I can't hit that enough, as to say, you got to contribute. Dave, one thing you said, I get it. Some schools might have some sensitivity about their data. Here in the state of Florida, we are a very extensive open records state. Every breath is a public record. So I think it kind of gets you over that, and gets you to the point of taking some pride in what you're putting forth. But there's one thing that I think is kind of one of those unintended side effects, which I think is really cool. There is dining data included in there, and at our institution, dining is under the Office of Business Services. It's not under Student Affairs. It's not under Housing. And I firmly believe if the first time you need something from a campus partner is the first time you outreach them, you're already kind of behind the eight ball. And I just love that every year they know that I'm coming to them in October, and they know that I'm willing to give them and share data back with them to help their operations. So they actually look forward to that and think about that, how much more comfortable I am to reach out to these campus partners when a hurricane hits and we don't have, and there's some kind of campus event that's occurring. And I know it's kind of strange to draw from CHI into campus crisis preparedness, but it helps build those relationships. They know what I'm doing, and it brings them in on the conversation, and it helps that collegiality. So that's just another unintended side effect of it that I certainly don't want to discount.
I'll double down on both of you said this, like do it. Fill out the survey. The more data that is in there, the more powerful it is. I don't off the top of my head know what the participation rate is, but it ought to be a lot higher than it is. While it is the most powerful database we've got, it certainly could be magnitudes more powerful. And so please, please, please fill it out. Now I'll be a little bit of a data nerd here and say, as you access the data, as a practitioner, one of the things I would advise you to do to continue to make it better is to be discerning. And being discerning means ask the right questions of the right people. Sometimes that's Tori, sometimes that's a colleague, and sometimes it's referencing the original survey tool to understand what the data definitions are, because so many housing operations around the country define things very, very different. And to Steve's point about apples to apples, it's really, really critical. So I'll give you a data example from the CHI. Should OPEX include your debt payment? And if it should, is it calculated that way in the CHI or not calculated that way in the CHI? If you calculate it that way, that doesn't mean that's the way the CHI calculates it. And if you're trying to get to an apples to apples comparison on OPEX per bed and you're including your debt payment, no one else is, which by the way, the industry standard is you should not, then what you need to do is take another step of taking debt payment out before you do that comparison. Little things like that, and being discerning and understanding the actual data you're looking at and understanding what the question is and what the definition of the data is, I think is absolutely critical. And then back to Steve's point about the 50% or Dave's point about that threshold, it is easy to reach, but I would say know that there are certain data points in there that are least likely to meet the threshold. So Steve mentioned dining data. Dining data is great. Lots and lots of institutions don't have access to their dining data, either because they're under a third-party contract and they do not, through that third-party contract as the SHO, have access to the data, or somebody else is managing dining and isn't willing to share it with them. That's one of our areas of lower participation rate. And so we have to look at it and say, how good is that data? It is good, but could it be better? Sure. And how do we make it better? And so be discerning as you look at the data, particularly as you are striving to get as close to apples as you can. And I know ACUHO-I is continuing to make efforts to move the survey towards being a tool that helps users get closer to apples every single day as much as they can.
Well, I think that's a terrific place to kind of end the conversation today. I really want to thank Steve, TJ, and Dave for their time, and Tori for setting this up and contributing as well. They don't have to do this, but they spent a lot of time preparing for this and sharing their knowledge with you all. And of course, would love to thank the attendees for showing up and listening in and asking questions. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and end. And I see that Linda posted a link for a CE request form. So if you're on there, please go ahead and click on that and complete the form. But we appreciate everyone's time, and be on the lookout for more possible webinars and other things coming from the research committee this year in 2026.
I'll just add if there are any final questions. We have time while we're all here. And also just stay tuned for news about the data being released. There should be something hopefully in Connections next week. And you should be able to get in there and see the new results soon, and look for more publications and reports coming out throughout the year.
Well, not seeing any questions. So I think we'll go ahead and leave it there. Appreciate you all, and have a great start to your semesters.